I interrupted you when you were about to tell me about another Quincy story.
Well, we had a show on Quincy about incest. And it was, again, a terrific script. And I knew a wonderful actor with whom I'd worked, Charles Aidman, wonderful actor. And I said to Jack, oh, there's one guy for this show, and it's Chuck Aidman. Oh, Jack said, wonderful, wonderful. Well, let's see, is he free? Can we get him? Gave the script to Chuck Aidman. He said, Jeff, I don't know about this. It's a wonderful script, it's a wonderful part, but I do this American Airlines commercial, voiceover, and, this is a very touchy subject. As a matter of fact, when Jack submitted the script to the network said, there's no way you're going to put this on the air. This is too hot for us to handle. You cannot do it. And I was with Jack. When he picked up the phone, he called somebody at, I think, NBC it was, and he said, listen, if I can't do this script, I'm not coming to work. End of series. So, pardon me, he won. He got to do the script, and he said, now, come on, we got to get Aidman. He's a great actor, and he'd be great in this part. And Chuck said, Jeff, I just feel uncomfortable with this American. I said, what, Chuck, come on. You're a voiceover. Nothing's going to happen. This is a hell of a part. He said, finally, much persuasion on the basis of our relationship and that we had worked together and were good friends. Okay, he said, I'll do it. Oh, Jack was so excited. I was so excited. He did the show. He was wonderful. It was a powerful show. Really, American Airlines canceled him. Boom, right out of the water. Finished with American Airlines. It was crazy. They just wouldn't hire him again. Wouldn't continue with him. I always felt so badly for this lovely guy. Anyway, but those were the shows that Jack did. They were all, not all, but so many of them, meaningful shows.
What was Klugman like to work with as an actor?
Pretty good. Good. He was, he's a terrific actor. And he had his fix on a part. And listen, he knew that character so well, that it was easy enough to deal with him because that was his character. He had developed it, he created it, and he was damn good.
Were there other shows where you were party to fights between the network and the producers or over content?
That one, the Jack series in particular, was very tricky, very, very tricky. Yes, there were many other shows that I had trouble with language. I remember there was a chap at NBC, Stockton Helfrich. His name's still in my mind all these years later. This wonderful man whom I knew from my early days at NBC, way, way back. And he had then become a major vice president of the company. And I would have scripts at NBC, and they'd come back and they'd say, no, continuity at NBC says you can't say damn in this scene, or you can't say hell in this scene. And I'd say, well, wait a minute. We're on at 10 o'clock. This was after the family hour business. We're on at 10 o'clock, and it's not vulgar. It's not, we're not using four-letter words that are vulgar. It's the nature of the people involved in this scene. They need this kind of language. And they'd say, no, can't be. And I remember on occasion, I said, well, who said that? Who was the person at NBC? And they'd say, well, the top guy is Stockton Helfrich. And I would call him on more than one occasion. And he remembered me from way back from my beginning days in the research department. He was at NBC then. And I'd say, but Stockton, read the scene, and he would back off, not always, most of the time he would back, or he would supply a substitute. He was very bright, nice man. So that would come up over the years from time to time. But I think Jack was the most, how can I say, combative for good reason. And he would win. He would always win because he was always right.
Around the same time as Quincy, you worked on The Incredible Hulk.
Yes, I sure did.
What was that show like to direct?
Good, because there was a cameraman on that show by the name of John McPherson, one of the best cameramen I've ever worked with, a cinematographer, absolutely top of the line, wonderful guy, wonderful personality, and talented and fast, and just, we had such creative juices going between us. And Lou Ferrigno couldn't have been nicer, couldn't have been more cooperative. Bill Bixby I'd worked with him on the courtship of Eddie's father. I just did one show there. It was okay, but I felt, I didn't have to continue necessarily with that particular series. And so then we met again on the Incredible Hulk, and he was, kind of nice enough, but he was also a director. And in his heart, I felt Bill Bixby thought he was a better director, not only than me, but I learned from other people that he thought he was a better director than almost anyone else down the line. And he didn't interfere very much, if at all, but you always had the feeling somebody's looking over your shoulder, maybe, a little bit of that. But listen, we got along. I did a lot of those shows, as I recall, mainly because McPherson was just such an exciting guy to work with. It just was fun, and really creative. We would do things in terms of the filming of the show that was always exciting to me.
Like what? Do you remember examples?
Well, not in any particular sense, but there were always challenges with the stories, about this transition from Bixby to the Hulk and the Hulk to Bixby and so forth. And I offhand don't remember, except to say that going to work on that show because of the cinematographer was always wonderful for me.
How did you handle those transitions between Bixby and the Hulk what did you have to do for the special effects?
It was not hard, really. I don't remember now, but you had, Bixby, and you kind of locked into a certain position with the camera and Bixby, and then we had to wait. The toughest part of that was we had to wait until Bill changed the lens in his eye. The contact lens had to be changed from his real look in his eyes to the look of the Hulk, and that was done in close-up. And you had to, just stop, and you couldn't shoot anything else because you were kind of locked into where we were with the camera. And Bill would walk over, and they had a lady on the set who was the expert in contact lenses, and 20, 30 minutes would go by till she got the lenses in, and until Bill came back. And out of, every day that we had that transition to and from, you lost an hour with Bill with the contact lenses. And that was tough. That was painful because you had to shoot, 7, 8, 10 pages a day or else.
And that was Universal again, right?
So, you bet. And boy, they just were on the clock, let me tell you.
Well, that was an adaptation of a comic book. So did you,
There were but the scripts were not comic book stories. Once again, Bill Bixby, very intelligent guy. The producer of that show was
Ken
Johnson. And Ken, again, great facility for interesting stories, interesting gimmicks, interesting this. And he was so imaginative, Ken Johnson. I think he's still going strong. But he had just a mind for, get me 5 cameras for this sequence. Let's cover it, really cover it, and he could do that at Universal. He was one of the few who could, push that budget around a little, with, I guess, Bill's help or what have you. But so I enjoyed Ken Johnson a lot, and he had a wonderful guy with a great sense of humor, and enjoyed life and made everybody around him kind of enjoy themselves. So it was good. I'm trying to think of, after Hulk, I went into, the Knight Rider, which, again, that had major stunts. Tell you about Knight Rider. When I first went into Knight Rider, was Ken Johnson on that? I don't remember. Maybe he was. I don't remember. Anyway, when I first went into Knight Rider, we did one major stunt with the car in the show, in the 4 acts of the show. Second season, I was there. The network demanded 2 stunts in the hour. Oh, you can have an extra half day maybe. Well, but those stunts were major stunts with those models, that they had, which was, to me, I loved that part of it. It was so imaginative and exciting to, see these models and shoot them with the car as if it were, the real thing, the real city or the real railroad crash or whatever. Third season, we were up to 4 major stunts, 1 in every act, with maybe 1 extra day of the 6 days. Otherwise, the pressure was so intense to get those 4 stunts in your shooting schedule. It was really, really tough. David Hasselhoff was charming, a delightful young man. Again, came in prepared, knew his lines, worked very hard, cared about the show, cared about everybody around him on the show. And we developed a family, actually. He was very big on, in terms of just keeping us all together and happy, and so he made it fun and challenging, to get to see those stunts happen, was wonderful.
So some of the stunts were done with miniatures.
Oh, most of them. Oh yeah. Well, not all, but I don't know about most, but a lot of them. And they had 2 guys in the valley at a shop, and they had scripts way in advance, or story ideas way in advance, and it was just so exciting to see what we could do. It reminds me to go back, if I may. I was at Warner's doing a lot of shows at the time. One of them was maybe Surfside 6, or maybe it was a 77 Sunset script, but it was in that whole period at Warner Brothers. And they said, well, here's a script. I don't remember which of those shows it was. And it all took place in Malibu on the beach, and boats, 2 boats out in the Pacific Ocean, and surfers. The whole show was about a surfer and his buddies in the Pacific Ocean. And I thought to myself, oh, this is going to be fun. I'm going to get out to Malibu. We're going to get on a boat. Little did I know how much fun it is shooting on a boat with those waves coming in, which I learned on other shows. But I thought, oh, this is going to be great. We're going out to Malibu and shoot on location. Oh, no. This is Warner Brothers. We put this boat in the stage. We put on the big screen behind the boat. We put the boat on a gimbal so it rocks back and forth. We have all the hoses and the prop men. You're right. I said, but you got the beach. We'll give you a beach. Come down the stage, whatever, 14, and to have a look. And I would go down. There was a beach right on the stage, a real beach, with the blue sky behind it and the cliff and so forth. So I never left the studio. And I shot this whole movie with these surfers on their boards in the water, and the boats coming and going, and the beach with the fire at night, the bonfire, the campfire. It was like magic to me when I saw the show cut together. It was one of the thrills of my life, that we were able to fool everybody, including me, when I saw the film. So in that sense, working with the miniatures was the same way. We would shoot these incredible scenes, I mean, the car would be downtown on the roof in the city of whatever city, and it would jump from this building to that building, and all done in the miniatures, And it was just so much fun to see it all cut together after we would shoot all those pieces and they all would fit together. And these two guys in the valley making these incredible models, you know, of all the different things we would need for the show. Amazing, amazing.
Did you get to direct William Daniels as the voice of the car?
Not really, because he never appeared. He was only voiceover, and Joel Rogerson would have him do all the voice recordings at a studio somewhere, and I'd just have to play them.
Can you talk a little bit about how Knight Rider was written?
Well, now, that's a story, because, as I said, the demands were so great from the network about the stunts in the show, and the time pressure was so great that instead of a writer having a story and writing the whole story from beginning to end, no, they had a writer for the first and second act, and everything was so fast and hurried and behind the gun on the schedule that they'd bring in another writer or two other writers for Act 3 and Act 4, or maybe the first guy who wrote Act 1 would be brought around to do Act 4 while somebody was writing Acts 2 and 3. And I would get a script, and I'd say, well, wait a minute. This man was killed in Act 2. How come he's back on the scene in Act 4? And this would happen quite often. I don't mean to that extreme, but that would literally happen. People killed off early in the show would reappear as vital parts of the story at the end, because these writers were so busy writing their stuff, and these writers were so busy writing their scenes that the producer didn't have time to reconcile one to the other. And this would go on I wouldn't say all the time, but it would go on too often to be comfortable.
And what would you do when you had that script?
I'd go to the producer and I'd point out the, what is the word, anomaly or whatever it was. I'd point out... Discrepancy, thank you. I'd point out the discrepancy, and he would frantically, try to fix it right there and then, because I would be shooting it tomorrow. That kind of thing. So, look what happened in television. From the time that I did, pick Donna Reed, Leave It to Beaver, Andy Griffith, where one writer, or maybe a team, would write the entire episode, beginning to end. Now I'm in a business where I'm given scripts written by 4, 6 writers, some of whom have never met one another, and who are dealing on their own levels, not coordinating. I digress to tell you a story. My wife was an actress, as I told you, Eva Marie Saint. We loved Frasier, the show Frasier. We loved that show, watched it more, than any other series I can think of. And so she mentioned that to somebody, or the producer whom we met at the theater. She loved that show. The next thing you know, they wrote a script for her. Oh, she was so flattered, so thrilled. Wow, I'm going to be on Frasier. This was such a big thing for her, to be in this comedy with these wonderful, wonderful actors. So fine, comes the day to come to rehearsal. She walked into the studio somewhere in Hollywood, and they have a bleachers set up where they tape the show on the floor of the stage, and there are these bleachers. And sitting in the bleachers were like 25 people for the first reading. And she thought, oh, they've invited an audience to listen to the first reading. So she went to the table and sat down and met everybody, and they read the script through, and she thought it was pretty funny, She was so excited to be there. And all 25 people then got up from the bleachers, and they walked down, and they sat around the table. They were the writers. 25 or 20 writers, more, sat around the table and started making more jokes on top of the jokes on a script that she thought was pretty funny to begin with. The premise was so good. So that's where we've come in television, right? From the writer who did Andy Griffith, one writer, to 20 writers on a sitcom.
Let me ask you quickly about some of the other shows you did during the 80s. One of them was Palmerstown, USA.
One of my favorite of all the shows we've talked about. How can you beat Norman Lear and Alex Haley? I mean, what a combination of writers, and they hired, wonderful writers.
They created the show?
Yeah.
Tell me what it was about.
Norman Lear and Alex Haley created a show based on Alex Haley's experience as a young black man, growing up in a very southern, I was at Tennessee, I think, small town where there were black families and white families living on different sides of the town. And it was the story of the black family, Alex Haley's family, and a white family with whom his folks were friendly. And it was an hour every week of the inner reaction between the two within the black family, within the white family, and the interaction between the two families. And they were just the most beautifully, wonderfully written scripts. Wonderful. I love that show. I just love doing that show. But we shot most of it out at the Disney Ranch. The Disney Ranch is just under the 35-mile limit for location shooting. In other words, all the rules that apply to location shooting do not apply to the Disney Ranch because it's just inside the line.
You mean like union rules?
Yes, right. So at the time that I did that year on that show, I had to drive, let's say out of the 5-day week, 3 days at least or more, out to maybe 4 to the Disney Ranch, 30 miles on the freeway. Tough show, tough outdoor shooting on the ranch, long hours. For some reason, again, trying to get it all in 6 days or 7 days. It was physically very, very demanding. I mean, among other things, for instance, one day I'm shooting a scene in a field right here, and for whatever reason, I notice all the actors looking over my shoulder when we finish a scene. I turn around and I look up, and there's a herd of buffalo within 3 feet of me, standing on this little knoll, looking right down on me. I almost fainted dead away. First of all, if you've ever seen, I don't know if you've ever seen a buffalo, they're this wide, and they're about 6 feet high. I mean, they're the biggest animals you could imagine. And there was a herd of them right looking down on what we were shooting. I mean, among other things on the Disney Ranch that you had to deal with. Anyway, so it was very, very tough physically. And there were many nights when I would drive home, it would be dark, late, early evening, would say 7, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock at night, dark, and I'd go down the freeway and pass my exit. I'd be so tired and so busy thinking of tomorrow's shooting and what I didn't get today, what I had to pick up tomorrow. And that's what led, by the way, just another footnote, to a negotiation where we met, the Directors Guild negotiating with the producers, and we demanded drivers to the locations outside the studio and won that fight based on my experience at the Disney Ranch. As a matter of fact, with Aaron Spelling seated across from the table and having a big contretemps with me, how they couldn't afford it, it would break the studios, it would be the end of television in Hollywood. And I just sat there and I said, Aaron, I don't want to get killed on the freeway. It's as simple as that. It's my life against your dollars. What can I tell you? And we won the fight. But it was because of that series, by the way, that now all the directors have drivers out to locations. Anyway, the show was just very special, very, very special. Actors were wonderful all the way around, all the way around. No stars, but major talents that Norman Lear put together with Alex Haley, and Reuben Cannon, who is now a big producer, was the casting guy on that show. And I did one early on in the series, and then I loved it, and fortunately it went well. So I went back and I did every other show, I think, in the first year. And then it was just physically too demanding. It was really tough.
Do you remember Michael J. Fox from the cast?
Certainly. Oh, do I ever. One day, he was wonderful, just wonderful. That's what I mean about the actors, you know. No one knew at the time Michael Fox, except Michael Fox was just a terrific kid, you know. Like his mother, for instance, was a young actress from Chicago who played his mother. Incredible. His father was a guy who's in New York now. I forgot his name. Extraordinary talent. Just very special. Anyway, I came to work one Monday morning. Michael's in the first shot. He's not there. Very unusual because this kid was, again, disciplined, right on the money. Knew his lines, was never late, always ready to go. Not there. I said, where is he? Just shoot something else. They wouldn't tell me. I thought, well, this is strange, you know. But I kept busy, you know. You just do what you have to do. Middle of the afternoon, he shows up. And I said, are you okay? Yeah, I'm fine. What happened? Let's just do the, you know. Nobody would say anything. I learned the next day through a friend on the set or in the office. He's Canadian. Every weekend, he'd hop a plane and go home. He was 15 years old. He'd go home to his family, and he'd come back on Sunday night. Except crossing the border, coming back on a Sunday, they stopped him at the border, and they said, well, wait a minute, where's your whatever, the pass you need to go back to the States? And he didn't have the right card or whatever. He didn't take the right thing. And so they kept him at the border until Norman Lear had to call this congressman or somebody in Washington and get them to call the Canadian Mounties to let Michael come through the border, and they flew him down. That's one of the stories I remember from that. That was a wonderful show.
Do you remember you did an episode of Magnum P.I.?
Yes, in Hawaii. Yeah, it was nice. I loved Hawaii. I did a couple of shows in Hawaii over the years. That was a good show. It was fun to do. The star of that show was very good. Nice guy.
Tom Selleck.
Yeah, Tom was a lovely guy, and the people around him were nice, you know. And shooting in Hawaii is pretty nice, you know. It's comfortable. You stay at a beautiful hotel. You have a wonderful background against which to shoot, and the stories were good. You know, they were really good.
You did Cagney and Lacey once?
Yes. That was, again, a good experience. Tyne Daly I found wonderful. You know, I'd known her through her dad from the time she was a young kid, actually, on a personal level. Sharon Gless, good actress. It was fine. It's okay. It was, you know, in the scheme of things, not the most enjoyable experience, but it was good.
You sound like you're being discreet.
Well, somewhat.
You worked briefly in daytime TV. Tell me why.
How did that happen? How did that come about? I had, at a certain point, I somehow had never realized that the daytime soaps were shot and done just like we did live television back in New York. And so somewhere along the way, somebody said to me, listen, how would you like to have this experience all over again? I said, what do you mean? They said, well, if you did a soap, you could do, you know, your 3 cameras, and it would be just like you're back in the old days in New York. And I said, oh, you know, I'd love to do that again. So I signed on to do like a week or 2 weeks on a show.
Was that Santa Barbara or
No.
Capitol?
Capitol. And Carolyn Jones, I mentioned, was a personal friend from, she was, I think, one of the stars on that show. And I think it was Carolyn who said, this is fun. This is just like back in New York. And so I did 1 or 2 weeks, I think, whatever, and I loved it. I just loved being back in the booth calling the shots. So I did it, I think, for, I don't know, 6 months or I don't know how long. But I did a lot of episodes. I think I did 1 or 2 a week. I don't remember. And it was just wonderful, good cast. And there I was back in the booth doing my thing. So out of that came a show that was just being put together called Santa Barbara. And the producers of that show heard that we live in Santa Barbara half the time, weekends. My wife and I have a home in Santa Barbara. And they went to my agent and they said, we need an executive producer, and we understand Jeff Hayden has a home in Santa Barbara, so he knows the territory, because we've been up there 30 some odd years at that time. And would he be interested in producing this new soap opera? And they made me this incredible offer. And I said, yeah, I know the territory. Let me read the scripts and so forth. And it was fun. I was an executive producer, I think, for maybe 6 months. And then, and I enjoyed it because I do know the town, and I do know homes, beautiful homes and locations all over. And I cast the show, and I put it all together with Brandon Tartikoff, who was then the top guy at NBC. And that was exciting. I'd never been an executive producer. And I had really a good time. And then I was sitting in an office all the time. I never got to do the work on the set because I had to hire other directors, as I had to sit in the office and work on stories and everything else. And I couldn't stand sitting in the office for 6 months as I did. So I just got back out and went back to freelancing.
The last episodic television you did was for In the Heat of the Night.
Yes, I did a couple of seasons there with Carol O'Connor. I enjoyed that. Again, southern town, a lot of location shooting.
Where were the locations?
Right outside of this little town in Georgia. And we shot in a warehouse in that little town. I forgot the name of the town. Beautiful, picturesque town. That's in the show. We shot it there, and they had a warehouse where we had the sets. Shot everything there. And it was, again, a nice show to do because everything fit together. Carol O'Connor was an old and good friend from way back. We had worked together, so it was fun being with him. Terrific actor. Wonderful story mind. He actually had a lot to do with all those stories on all those episodes. So yeah, it was again a good show that I enjoyed doing. Then I got involved in making documentaries, and I found a new life for myself. A very good friend of mine died, a wonderful lady, and I felt I wanted to do something to commemorate this very rich and wonderful life of this woman. And so I set about to make a documentary on her life with the help of PBS, who financed most of it. And it was a whole new world for me, just a wonderful, wonderful new world. I spent 2 years or more, closer to 3, making that, doing the research, getting the money, putting it all together, shooting it and so forth, and had a very, very wonderful time and said, this is what I want to do. And so the next one I did was a documentary on American schools across the country with Bill Moyers. And that took a couple of years, again with PBS. And by the time I finished that, I said, I cannot go back to shooting episodic television. Well, by then I was I had reached beyond 65. I was getting my pension from the Guild, and felt that I had to, if I could, do some work in the theater. And so I'm now back in the theater, and have been for several years.
I just want to ask you a few quick questions to sum up, general questions about directing. Is it accurate to say that episodic TV directors of your generation sort of fall into the category, or were perceived as falling into the category, of either actors directors or camera directors?
That's not an easy answer. When I started out here after the New York years, I think all of us who were in television films at that time were, if you want to categorize us, we were all actors directors, I believe, in the beginning. When I think of the John Riches and the Charlie Dubins and so many of the people in my generation came from New York and were from the theater and were so-called actors directors. Over the years, I think what's happened is the producers of the shows became writers. That is to say, the fellows who wrote all these shows were in such demand by the networks that those writers became the producers of the shows. And as that happened, they brought in the new directors, the younger directors, who were either first assistant directors, production managers. They were not the same crowd that came out of the New York theater, or the New York television, the live television, I should say. They were more oriented in the film community and as film people, so that the directors became more technical than they were oriented towards the actor, if that makes sense. And so I think now most of the directors in television, who are clearly expert when you look at the shows and how well put together they are I feel people who work a lot with the cameras, but the actors are so good today in television. If you just look at the sitcoms or the dramas, I mean, they're extraordinary. They're so good that they can handle themselves without too much help from the directors. And it all goes so fast. There is no rehearsal to speak of. I remember in all my years, I'd come to the set in the morning. The first thing I did, I'd give the crew a setup, but I'd get my actors and we'd start rehearsing off the set. And every time there were lighting, I was always rehearsing with my actors for the next scene. That doesn't seem to happen these days. There's no rehearsal. They hire terrific actors. They learn their characters. They get good scripts. And they can just walk out on the set and they can shoot it and print it, and it works.
So was one thing or the other more important for you, the acting or the imagery?
Yes. To me personally, I come from the theater. I come from the actor studio. My contribution to all the shows that we've been talking about, I feel, had to do with working closely with actors and getting the most and the best I could get from those actors. Now, I shot them as well as I could. I don't think I was in any sense deficient in the technique of film, but mainly as I think of my work and my years, and as people know who have worked with me, I care about the actors.
You said that your mother-in-law could look at one of your Donna Reed shows and pick out which one you directed. How would the rest of us look at a show and say, that's a Jeffrey Hayden show?
I have no idea. How she did it, I don't know. Because certainly Robert Ellis Miller and whoever else was in on Donna Reed, they were terrific directors. I mean, it was a good... Certainly the people who directed Andy Griffith, wonderful, talented people. How she did that, I do not know. Unless she picked up on some of the stories that she knew were within our family. Or, I don't know. Look, the way I work is the way I work. I mean, I shoot a scene and I'm on the back of an actor for a reason, I go to the dailies, the producer said, "What are you doing? That guy's back is to the camera." And I'd say, "Yes, for a very good reason," or whatever it was. You know, he's thinking, this. I wanted his back to the camera. "Well, you can't do that on television. It's all a thing of close-ups." I said, "Not necessarily." I shoot a scene, I go to the dailies, the producers, "What's with that pause? You can't have that pause. We've got to cut that pause out," he says to the editor. I say, "No, wait a minute. There's a reason for that pause. Everything doesn't have to go boom, 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 boom." You know, people think, people stop, people feel. This is what creates a scene. No. Well, what are you going to do? That's my approach to my work, is my work with the actors.
In your whole career, what are you most proud of?
Ooh. That's like saying you have 2 children. Who's your favorite child? I don't know. I mean, I love Peyton Place. I love doing it. I loved Palmerstown. I love doing it. I don't know. I love doing The Incredible Hulk, as I told you, because of a relationship with a cinematographer. I love Donna Reed because Donna was so special and so dear and so good to, and the stories I love doing. I can't answer that question. Sorry, Steve.
You can't.
I enjoyed my life on all those shows. Now, when I got into the documentary field, that was something so different, you know. Technique was so different. The whole purpose of my involvement was so different. And I guess, you know, I'm very proud of the 2 documentaries I made and the impact that they had, certainly the second one. I did a documentary on the schools in America. The governor in the state of Ohio, when he saw that documentary, immediately put out an executive order that there would be no more coal-burning furnaces in the schools in Ohio. That was not a small achievement, among many other things that happened as a result of that documentary. He built 17 new high schools in the state of Ohio after he saw that documentary. Within the next 2 years, 17 brand new high schools were built in that state. That's not bad for a couple of years' work.
Well, that's what documentaries are for, to make change. Yeah.
Yes.
Do you have any regrets?
Well, to be honest with you, yes. I was out at Disney, and I directed a series called Gallagher. I don't remember the exact title. Gallagher was a story of a young boy who was a young newspaper guy, a young 15, 16-year-old kid. And I did, I don't know how many hours, maybe, I don't know, it's 3 hours or 6 hours of a mini-series on the Disney lot for Disney. He produced it. And I worked with Walt on that series. And I loved doing the series. And I had some thoughts story-wise on the series, and Walt agreed with me. I had a wonderful time working with him. I thought he was just so smart and helpful and so forth. But the producer, the actual producer, the line producer, was somebody else, without naming any names. And we didn't exactly see eye to eye as I did with Walt, with whom I had started on the project. And so I finished the series and went off to do other things. I'm kind of sorry, because I loved the 6 months or whatever time I had on the Disney lot. It was a very special experience for me in terms of the support and the help from Disney himself. And the whole ambiance of that lot was so special. And I was never, back there. And that's, if there is such a thing as a regret, I sometimes think to myself, I wish I'd, been able to stay there while Walt was still there. However, no big deal.
Jeff, how would you like to be remembered?
Oh, by my kids. Good father, good grandfather. That'll do it for me. Really, that's about the most things. That's what matters the most.
Very good. Well, thank you very much. This has been terrific.
My pleasure.